It wasn't a dramatic, screaming fight that ended my marriage. It was worse. It was a verdict, delivered with all the sterile finality of a courtroom sentence on a random Tuesday night. The air was thick with the scent of Beatrice's potpourri and righteous indignation. Rain lashed against the pristine bay windows of the house I'd called home for 5 years, a house I now knew was never really mine. My mother-in-law stood before me, a pillar of tasteful beige and simmering hatred. Her husband, Silas, my father-in-law, flanked her like a brutish gargoyle, his arms crossed over a chest puffed with patriarchal pride. And then there was Mark, my Mark. He was supposed to be my husband, my partner, my other half. Instead, he was a human-shaped puddle of cowardice, fidgeting by the grand oak door, his eyes fixed on a particularly interesting spot on the hardwood floor. 5 years, Alara, Beatrice began, her voice a low, venomous hiss that cut through the sound of the storm outside. She didn't need to shout. The quiet was so much more brutal. We have been patient. We have been kind. We have welcomed you. You welcomed me like a bad case of indigestion, I thought, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. We have given you every opportunity to fulfill your duty as a wife, she continued, each word a perfectly polished stone of contempt. To give this family what it deserves, a grandson, an heir to carry the family name. She took a small, dramatic step forward. The doctor's results were clear. We saw the report Mark showed us. My head snapped towards my husband, a fresh wave of betrayal washing over me. He flinched but didn't look up. The problem, Beatrice said, savoring the word, is with you. You are barren ground. Barren ground. The phrase hung in the air, ugly and final. It wasn't just an insult. It was a branding. I looked at the man I had loved, the man who had held me and told me it didn't matter, that we would figure it out. I pleaded with my eyes, say something, say anything. He finally met my gaze, his own eyes slick with unshed tears of pure, pathetic weakness. I'm sorry, Alara, he mumbled, his voice cracking. It's my parents' house. It's their legacy. That was it. 5 years of my life, my love, my devotion, erased for a legacy he couldn't even define. Silas, who hadn't spoken a word, moved then. He grabbed a single navy blue suitcase from the hall closet, a suitcase I had never seen before, and shoved it towards me. It wobbled on its wheels, its handle cold in my suddenly numb hand. My entire life apparently fit into a single generic piece of luggage. This is for the best, Silas grunted, his first and only contribution to the conversation. Beatrice opened the grand oak door, letting in a gust of cold, wet air that felt like a slap. We wish you well, of course, she said, a lie so blatant it was almost funny. But the family must continue, and you are no longer a part of it. The door slammed shut. The click of the deadbolt was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my life breaking in two. I stood there on the pristine porch, the rain plastering my hair to my face, clutching the handle of a suitcase full of a life I no longer owned. Well, I thought, a hysterical bubble of laughter rising in my throat. This is slightly more dramatic than just asking for a divorce. The motel room smelled of despair and industrial strength cleaner. The floral bedspread was scratchy. The single window looked out onto a flickering neon sign advertising vacancy, and the air conditioner rattled like a dying man. It was the perfect setting for the complete and utter implosion of my life. For 48 hours, I existed in a state of suspended animation. I cried until my eyes were swollen slits and my throat was raw. Then, when the tears ran out, I just stared. I stared at the water-stained ceiling, at the peeling veneer of the dresser, at the silent screen of my phone. I'd tried calling Mark, of course. Straight to voicemail. His parents? Blocked. My own parents had passed away years ago, leaving me feeling like an island in the middle of a hostile ocean. The practicalities began to sink in, sharp and cruel. I checked my online banking app. The joint account, the one containing every penny we had saved, had been systematically drained. A single, final transfer had been made 2 days ago, leaving behind a balance of $17.34. Enough for a sad sandwich and a bus ticket to nowhere. They hadn't just kicked me out. They had financially executed me. On the third day, hunger finally won out over grief. I dumped the contents of my purse onto the scratchy bedspread, searching for stray bills, loose change, anything. A lipstick rolled away, a crumpled receipt, a house key that was now useless. And then I saw it. Tucked into a forgotten side pocket was a thick, cream-colored envelope, slightly crumpled and addressed to me in a spidery, elegant script I hadn't seen in years. It was from my grandmother. My grandmother was a character. A tough, cynical woman who had been widowed young and had clawed her way to a comfortable life through sheer force of will. We weren't close exactly. She found my optimism naive and my choice of husband predictably disappointing. When she passed away 3 years ago, her lawyer had sent me a check for $10,000, which Mark and I had promptly put towards a new car. I assumed that was it. My fingers trembled as I tore open the seal. The letter inside was short, her words as sharp and unsentimental in death as they had been in life. My dearest Alara, if you are reading this, it means that milquetoast boy and his dreadful parents have finally shown their true colors. Do not cry. Anger is a much more productive emotion. I told you a man who can't stand up to his own mother can't stand up for his wife. The 10,000 was for a vacation. This letter is for your life. I have left you a real inheritance, a proper one. It is held in a trust with a contingency I specifically designed for a situation just like this. My lawyer has been waiting for your call. His name is Arthur Abernathy. His number is below. He will explain everything. Now stop feeling sorry for yourself. Go get what's yours, and for God's sake, buy yourself some better shoes. Love, the tough kind. Grandma Rose. I read the letter once, twice. A tiny, impossible spark ignited in the cold, dead wreckage of my heart. A contingency? A real inheritance? It was probably nothing. A few $1,000s, maybe. But it was something. It was a lifeline. I looked at the name and number at the bottom of the page. Arthur Abernathy. For the first time in 3 days, I didn't feel like barren ground. I felt like a seed, buried under a mountain of dirt with just enough light to start pushing my way up. Mr. Abernathy's office was in one of those old, grand buildings downtown with a marble lobby and a manually operated elevator that smelled of brass polish and old paper. The man himself was even older than the building, but his eyes were as sharp and clear as glass. He was impossibly tall and thin, dressed in a three-piece suit that was probably older than I was, but looked more stylish than anything in my ex-husband's closet. He stood up as I entered his office, a cavern of dark wood and leather-bound books. "Miss Vance," he said, extending a dry, cool hand. He used my maiden name. The sound of it was jarring, like hearing a song you'd forgotten you knew. "I am Arthur Abernathy. Your grandmother was a magnificent woman, formidable, and she adored you, in her own unsentimental way. Please sit." I sank into a leather armchair that sighed under my weight. I probably looked like a refugee, still wearing the same clothes from 2 days ago, my face pale and puffy. "Mr. Abernathy, my grandmother's letter, I don't understand." He smiled, a faint, dry crackle of a thing. "Rose was a planner. She believed in preparing for the worst. She saw your marriage for what it was, a temporary arrangement with a man of weak character. So, she created a trust." He slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the polished expanse of his desk. "The $10,000 you received upon her death was, as she put it, bait. The real inheritance, her entire estate, was placed in the Vance Trust. It had a very specific, very unique condition for disbursement." I leaned forward, my heart starting to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Oh, what condition?" "The trust would remain locked, managed by me, until one of two things happened," he said, tapping a long, bony finger on the folder. "Either you reached the age of 50, or your marriage was dissolved involuntarily due to what she termed egregious familial misconduct." My jaw went slack. "What?" "Her words, not mine. Though I did help her draft the clause," he said with a glimmer of pride. "She wanted to ensure you couldn't be cheated out of your inheritance by your husband. But she also wanted to ensure you had a nuclear option if his family turned on you. Getting kicked out of your home for the reasons you were kicked out, qualifies as egregious familial misconduct in spectacular fashion." He opened the folder. It was filled with deeds, financial statements, stock certificates. The numbers made my head spin. It wasn't a few $1,000s, it was millions. I was staring at a fortune I never knew existed. Your grandmother was a very savvy real estate investor, Mr. Abernathy explained calmly, as if he were discussing the weather. She bought properties in the city decades ago when they were cheap. She held on to them. This portfolio is substantial. He pulled out one last document from the folder and laid it on top. It was a thick file, and on the tab, in neat block letters, was a single name: the Sinclair. My breath hitched. I knew that name. Of course I knew that name. The Sinclair, I whispered. The apartment building on Elm Street. The very same, Abernathy confirmed. A pre-war gem, 32 units. And, according to my records, a certain Silas and Beatrice have been tenants in apartment 4B for 43 years. I stared at him, my mind struggling to connect the dots. The building they boasted about as if it were their ancestral castle. The home they held over Mark's head. The place where my executioners laid their heads at night. I own it? I asked, my voice barely a squeak. Mr. Abernathy gave me that dry, crackling smile again. Not yet. Right now, the trust owns it. But according to your grandmother's wishes, you are now the sole beneficiary and executor. You have full control. You can keep it, sell it, or manage it as you see fit. He leaned back in his chair, his sharp eyes studying me. The question, my dear Miss Vance, is, what do you want to do with it? I looked at the file for the Sinclair. I thought of Beatrice's sneer, Silas's smug silence, Mark's pathetic apology. I thought of them sitting in their precious apartment 4B, celebrating their victory, secure in their little kingdom. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It probably looked terrifying. I didn't care. Oh, I think I want to manage it, I said, my voice dripping with a sweetness that was pure acid. I think I want to be a very, very hands-on landlord. The next 2 years were a blur, a montage. If my life were a movie, this is where you'd hear the upbeat driving pop song while I dramatically transformed from a sad sack into a boss. The reality was a lot less glamorous and involved a lot more takeout coffee and staring at spreadsheets until my eyes burned. I moved out of the motel from hell and, with Abernathy's help, secured a sleek, anonymous apartment in a different part of the city. It was my war room. The walls were covered in whiteboards, flowcharts, and printouts of New York tenancy laws. The first thing to go was the old Ilara. I walked into a salon with my long, mousy hair and walked out with a sharp, angular bob that meant business. I threw out the floral dresses and sensible flats and, following my grandmother's posthumous advice, bought myself some killer shoes. And the power suits to go with them. It felt like putting on armor. Fueled by righteous fury and an obscene amount of caffeine, I became a sponge. I devoured online courses in business management, contract law, and corporate finance. Abernathy, who had clearly decided I was the most interesting thing to happen to his practice in decades, became my Yoda. He'd take me to lunch and grill me on eviction codes and property tax loopholes. Revenge is a dish best served legally, he'd say, dabbing his lips with a napkin. Anyone can throw a rock. The trick is to own the quarry and sell them the rock. My plan wasn't just to be their landlord. That was too simple, too direct. I wanted to be a ghost, a force of nature, a bureaucratic nightmare that slowly, methodically dismantled their comfortable little lives. The first step was creating the perfect weapon, Vance Holdings LLC. It was a shell corporation, a ghost in the machine. Abernathy's legal team wrapped it in so many layers of anonymity, it would take a forensic accountant a decade to unravel. The name was my little private joke, my maiden name, the part of me they had tried to erase. Then came the transfer. Abernathy handled the transaction, moving the ownership of the Sinclair from the Vance Trust to Vance Holdings LLC. On paper, the building had simply been sold to a new, faceless corporation. No one was the wiser. For months, I was a spy. I became obsessed. I studied the building's blueprints. I learned the names of every tenant. I read years' worth of maintenance requests and complaint logs. I discovered that Silas and Beatrice were notorious complainers, but always paid their rent on time, a point of immense pride for them. I also discovered they were paying a ridiculously low, rent controlled rate that hadn't been seriously updated in 20 years. Well, I thought, a vicious little grin spreading across my face as I highlighted the figure on my spreadsheet. We can't have that, can we? I stalked their social media through anonymous accounts. Beatrice's Facebook was a shrine to her own perceived elegance. Endless posts of her award winning balcony garden, her gaudy furniture, and saccharine memes about the importance of family. It was all there. A perfect roadmap of her vanities and pressure points. Mark occasionally popped up in her photos, looking deflated. There was a new woman on his arm in some of the more recent pictures, a mousy looking thing who looked terrified of Beatrice. Good for her. The old Alara would have felt a pang of jealousy, a stab of hurt. But the new Alara, Ms. Vance, felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. He was just a tenant now. Tenant 4B adjacent. And his lease was about to come up for a very, very rigorous review. After 2 years, I was ready. The research was done, the legal framework was solid, the ghost was in the machine. It was time to start haunting. The first memo from Vance Holdings landed in the mailboxes of the Sinclair's tenants like a small, polite bomb. It was printed on thick, expensive-feeling cardstock, the logo a minimalist, vaguely menacing V. It was a masterpiece of cold, corporate jargon, announcing that the building was under new management and that we, the anonymous we, were excited to implement a series of upgrades and policy modernizations to enhance the living experience for all our valued residents. I knew from my perch in my war room across town exactly when the memos arrived, because at 3:15 p.m., the building's unofficial Facebook group, which I monitored with glee, exploded. Beatrice Vance. Did everyone get this notice? Who on earth is Vance Holdings? And what do they mean by policy modernizations? It sounds ominous. Brenda from 2A. I heard the old owners sold. Probably some faceless private equity ghouls from out of state. Silas Vance. Our rent is protected. They can modernize all they want, but they can't touch us. We have rights. Oh, you sweet summer children. 2 weeks later, the second memo dropped. This one announced the modernization of the rental payment system. All rents were now to be paid online via a new portal. More importantly, it included a legally vetted, across-the-board rent increase of 7%, the maximum allowable by law. The Facebook group went nuclear. Beatrice wrote a post so long and rambling it could have been serialized. She called the new owners soulless, predatory, and a disgrace to the history of this fine building. I sipped my wine and typed a polite, pre-written response from the official Sinclair management account. Dear residents, we understand that change can be challenging. The recent rent adjustment is in line with market rates and will fund numerous improvements, including the upcoming lobby renovation and security system upgrade. We appreciate your cooperation. Vance Holdings Management. Then I started twisting the knife, the small, petty cuts that would drive them insane. A new memo went out about common area aesthetics. All personal items, including doormats and unapproved decorative planters on balconies, were to be removed. Beatrice's award-winning balcony garden, her pride and joy, was officially in breach of contract. Another memo detailed a new, strictly enforced parking policy. Each unit was assigned one specific spot. Any vehicle in an unassigned spot would be ticketed and, after one warning, towed. Silas, who liked to park his oversized sedan wherever he pleased, got his first ticket within 24 hours. His apoplectic email to management was a thing of beauty. They were losing their minds, fighting a phantom. They demanded a meeting. They wanted to face the monster who was ruining their lives. After a month of them stewing in a broth of their own impotent rage, I decided it was time. I granted them an audience. I chose my armor carefully, a charcoal gray suit that screamed, "I own you," stiletto heels that made me feel 10 feet tall, and a blood-red lipstick. I arrived at the Sinclair and let myself into their apartment with my own key. I was standing in the middle of their living room when they walked in, their faces flushed with righteous anger from a pre-meeting strategy session. They stopped dead. Time seemed to slow down. I could see every micro expression. Beatrice's mouth fell open, a perfect O of disbelief. Silas's face went from ruddy to pale in a split second. And Mark, who was with them, just stared, looking like he'd seen a ghost. A very well-dressed, very pissed-off ghost. Beatrice found her voice first. "Elara, what are you doing here?" I gave them a slow, deliberate smile, letting the silence hang in the air for a deliciously long moment. I ran a finger along the back of their sofa, now my sofa, in my building. "Hello, Beatrice." "Silas." "Mark," I said, my voice as cool and smooth as polished marble. "You sent an email demanding to speak with the landlord." I paused, letting my eyes sweep over their horrified faces. "Please have a seat, in my living room." The silence in the room was so absolute, you could hear the frantic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner, a clock I now technically owned. Beatrice looked like a goldfish, her mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Silas sank into an armchair, his face the color of putty. Mark was the first to break. "Elara, we don't understand. How?" "It's Miss Vance to you, tenant," I said, the words sharp and clean. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The power in the room had shifted so completely it had probably altered the building's gravitational field. And as for the how, it's quite simple. I own the building. You are my tenants. And you, I said, my gaze landing on Beatrice and Silas, are in violation of several clauses in your lease agreement. I pulled a neatly folded document from my leather portfolio. Memo 3A regarding common area aesthetics. Your balcony is still cluttered with a truly staggering number of geraniums. Memo 4C parking regulations. Silas, your car was in visitor spot 7 again this morning. That's your second written warning. One more, and you'll be having a lovely chat with a man named Sal from the local tow yard. "This is insane!" Beatrice finally sputtered, finding her voice. "You can't do this. This is harassment." "Is it?" I tilted my head. It feels an awful lot like property management to me. The kind of thing you have to do when tenants refuse to follow the rules. Mark stepped forward, his hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. He looked older, tired. "Elara, please, can we just talk? I've tried to call you." "We have nothing to talk about, Mark," I said, my voice flat. "Our relationship is now governed by New York State tenancy law and the 47-page lease agreement you all signed last month. I suggest you read it." The fight went out of them, replaced by a stunned, horrified resignation. I had won. The initial glorious revenge was complete. I left them there, sitting in the ruins of their precious little kingdom, and went upstairs to the penthouse apartment, which I was renovating to be my new home, my throne room. The victory felt good. It felt righteous. But a strange new curiosity was taking root. Owning the building didn't just give me power, it gave me access to everything. The storage rooms, the maintenance logs, the deep, dusty archives of the building's history. A week later, I was in the basement storage area, overseeing the removal of some old, faulty boilers. Tucked away in a forgotten corner was a stack of water-stained cardboard boxes labeled Sinclair Admin, 1,980 to 1,995 inches. They were files from a previous superintendent who had passed away years ago, junk that should have been thrown out. Most of it was boring, old invoices, work orders for leaky faucets. But in the bottom of the last box, my fingers brushed against a thick manila envelope that felt different. It was sealed with old, yellowed tape. There was no label. Intrigued, I took it upstairs. Inside was a small bundle of letters tied with a faded red ribbon and a single official-looking document. The document was a birth certificate, Mark's birth certificate. I scanned it. Mother, Beatrice Vance. Father, Silas Vance. Nothing strange there. But then I read the letters. They were from a woman named Helen, a nurse at the hospital where Mark was born, written to the superintendent, a man named George, with whom she was clearly having an affair. They were chatty, gossipy letters about the hospital staff, their lives, their secrets. And then I saw the paragraph that made the air leave my lungs. And you will not believe the drama with that dreadful Mrs. Vance in room 204, the one whose husband struts around like a king. Well, the baby came, a boy, and the husband is overjoyed. But here's the tea, Georgie. I saw her chart. The husband, Mr. Vance, he's sterile. Had mumps as a kid, the whole shebang. There is no earthly way that baby is his. She must have had a little something on the side. The doctor knows, of course, but he's just smiling and shaking the man's hand. Can you believe the nerve? She's built their whole world on this lie, and the poor idiot is none the wiser. I almost feel sorry for him. I dropped the letter. My hands were shaking. I looked back at the birth certificate, at the name printed under father. Silas Vance, a forgery, a lie, the whole thing. The obsession with the family name, the desperation for a grandson, the barren ground speech. The entire life-shattering reason they had destroyed my marriage and thrown me into the street was built on a foundation of complete and utter fraud. Silas couldn't have a biological child. He never could. The game had just changed. This wasn't about eviction anymore. This was about annihilation. And I was holding the button. I sat in my half-renovated penthouse, the nurse's letter and the fraudulent birth certificate lying on my marble countertop like a bomb. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a feeling of terrifying absolute power. This information didn't just give me leverage, it was a soul-destroying weapon. I could vaporize their family with a single sentence. For a few days, I did nothing. I was paralyzed by the sheer gravity of it. Was this justice? Or was it just a different kind of cruelty? The old Alara would have recoiled. But the old Alara was gone, buried under 2 years of legal textbooks and a mountain of spite. Still, a part of me hesitated. I called the only person I could talk to. "Mr. Abernathy," I said when he picked up. "I need your advice." I explained what I had found, my voice low and clinical. He listened patiently without interruption. When I was done, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Well," he finally said, his voice dry as ever, "that is quite the predicament. Legally, the document is inadmissible hearsay and has no bearing on their tenancy. Morally, that's another matter entirely." "What would you do?" I asked. "What I would do is irrelevant, my dear," he replied gently. "I am a lawyer. My job is to win. Your initial goal was to secure your inheritance and achieve independence. You have done that spectacularly. The question you must ask yourself is, what is your goal now? Is it to win, or is it to obliterate?" He paused. "Remember, when you burn everything down, you're the one who has to live in the ashes." His words stuck with me. What was my goal? The righteous anger still burned hot, but for the first time, I considered the aftermath. The image of Silas's face when he learned the truth, it wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. It was just sad. My decision was made for me 3 days later. In a desperate last-ditch effort, Beatrice and Silas had gone on the offensive. They couldn't fight me legally, so they resorted to slander. They started going door to door, telling the other tenants horror stories about me. Not about Miss Vance, the corporate landlord, but about Ilara, Mark's vindictive, scorned ex-wife, who was using her mysterious new fortune to harass them. They twisted the narrative, painting themselves as the victims of a woman's fury. That was it. The hesitation vanished, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They had tried to destroy my reputation, to erase my identity. Now they were trying to do it all over again. They would never stop seeing me as the problem, the villain in their story. They had left me no choice. This wasn't about petty revenge anymore. This was about survival, about ending it once and for all. I sat down at my desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of Vance Holdings letterhead. I didn't need a lawyer to draft this one. I typed out a formal, final eviction notice for apartment 4B. The reasons cited were clear and legally sound: breach of contract, documented harassment of management, and a campaign of slander against the property owner, creating a hostile environment for all residents. They had 30 days to vacate the premises. I printed it, signed it with a firm, steady hand, and slid it into an envelope along with a high-quality photocopy of the nurse's letter and Mark's real birth certificate. I walked downstairs myself and taped it to their door. Let them find it when they came home from their little gossip tour. Let them read it together. The war was over. This was the unconditional surrender. They didn't wait 30 days. They didn't even wait for the sun to set. That evening, the buzzer to my penthouse screamed. I saw them on the video feed. Silas, Beatrice, and Mark, huddled together, their faces pale and furious. I buzzed them in. I wanted this confrontation on my turf. The elevator doors opened and they stormed into my apartment. Or they tried to storm. The sheer scale and luxury of the place seemed to suck the air out of their lungs. The gleaming hardwood floors, the floor-to-ceiling windows with their panoramic view of the city, the minimalist furniture that cost more than their car. It was all designed to communicate one simple fact. I was so far beyond them now they couldn't even see me. "What is the meaning of this?" Silas boomed, though his voice lacked its usual thunder. He was holding the eviction notice in a trembling hand. "You can't do this?" Beatrice was a wreck. Her carefully applied makeup was smudged, her eyes wild. "This is a trick. That letter. It's a lie, a vicious lie." I remained seated in a large armchair, swirling a glass of ice water. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I just watched them. "Is it a lie, Beatrice?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Are you sure about that?" Mark, who had been silent, finally spoke, his voice cracking with anguish. "Elara, why? Why would you do this to us, to my father?" "Your father?" I repeated, letting the question hang in the air. I set my glass down with a soft click. "That's the real heart of the matter, isn't it? The whole reason we're here. You kicked me out of my home. You left me with nothing. You called me barren ground because I failed to give Silas a grandson to carry on his precious bloodline." I stood up and walked slowly towards them. They instinctively took a step back. "Tell me, Beatrice," I said, my eyes locked on hers. "How was I supposed to give a sterile man a biological child? The doctors couldn't have explained that to you because you never would have let me see one, would you? It was easier to just blame me." The world stopped. The blood drained from Silas's face. He turned his head slowly, mechanically, to look at his wife. It was a look of such profound, devastating betrayal that it almost made me flinch. The pride, the arrogance, the decades of blustering self-importance, it all crumbled away in an instant, leaving behind a hollow, fragile old man. "Beatrice," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "what is she talking about?" Beatrice just sobbed, a raw, guttural sound. She couldn't look at him. And Mark. Oh, Mark. He looked back and forth between the two of them, the pieces of his life clicking into a new, horrifying picture. His entire identity, being Silas's son, the heir to the Vance name, was a lie. He wasn't the disappointing son of a great man. He was the product of a cheap affair, his existence a secret his mother had carried for 40 years. He staggered back and leaned against the wall, his face a mask of absolute horror. The family didn't just break. It detonated. It ceased to exist right there in my living room. There was nothing left to say. There were no more arguments to be had. "The eviction stands," I said into the suffocating silence. 30 days. I turned my back on them and walked to the window, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. My city. I heard their shuffling footsteps, the quiet closing of the door, and then I was alone. The implosion was quiet but total. There was no final dramatic confrontation. They didn't fight the eviction, they just disintegrated. Silas was the first to go. 2 days after the confrontation, a moving van pulled up. He took his clothes, his favorite armchair, and the grandfather clock. He didn't look back. Brenda from 2A told me he moved upstate to live with his sister. He didn't say a word to Beatrice or Mark on his way out. Beatrice disappeared a week later. She left in the middle of the night, leaving most of her belongings behind. The award-winning balcony garden withered. No one knew where she went. Part of me wondered if she just evaporated from the sheer force of her own shame. Mark was the last one left in the apartment, a ghost rattling around in the tomb of his family. He tried to call me once. I saw his name flash on my screen. My thumb hovered over the accept button. I felt a flicker of something. Pity, maybe. A ghost of the love I once had for him. He was a victim in this too, in a way. But then I thought of him standing by the door, letting his parents throw me out. I thought of the empty bank account, the motel room, the years of quiet condescension. He wasn't my problem to solve. He wasn't my responsibility. He was a tenant, and his lease was up. I pressed block. The final cut? A quiet digital beheading. He moved out a week before the deadline. The revenge, which had been the sun my entire world revolved around for 2 years, felt surprisingly hollow in the end. The victory wasn't in their destruction. It was in my own creation. I had the building. I had the money. I had the power, but the real prize was the silence in my own head. The peace. The story ends 6 months later. The penthouse is finished, but I spend most of my time on the roof. I'd torn up the old tar and gravel and, in a fit of irony, installed a lush, beautiful rooftop garden for all the tenants to share. It was 10 times more beautiful than Beatrice's balcony could have ever been. Mr. Abernathy was up there with me, sipping an iced tea I'd made him. He looked out over the planters filled with lavender and tomato vines. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said, his eyes twinkling, "though she would say this is all very sentimental." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh. She'd probably tell me I should be charging the tenants for access. He smiled. "Probably." I looked out over the skyline, the late afternoon sun warm on my face. I wasn't Miss Vance, the corporate shark, anymore. I wasn't Alara, the broken wife. I was just Alara, the landlord. The woman who had been thrown away and had somehow landed on her feet, on the roof of her very own building. They had wanted an heir to inherit a legacy. Instead, I inherited the whole damn building. And a life. My life.